I opened the door to my wife's company's lavish party with a gift in hand, only to see my wife's rich CEO on one knee proposing to my wife, "Will you leave your poor impotent husband and marry me?" Everyone laughed. Then my wife said yes. So I walked away, quietly canceled every payment, party, trip, and pulled out my 90% company share $357 million worth. Minutes later, my phone lit up with 156 missed calls, and someone showed up at my door. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and instantly know something's wrong? Like when your dog starts acting weird before an earthquake, or when your mom calls you by your full name. That's exactly what hit me the second I stepped into the Grand Meridian Ballroom, clutching a silver-wrapped gift box like some kind of chump. The place was dripping with money, and I mean literally dripping. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead like frozen fireworks, casting prismatic light across marble floors so polished you could probably perform surgery on them. The kind of opulent nonsense that screams, "We have more money than sense," in 14 different languages. Everyone was dressed to the nines, which in Manhattan terms means everyone looked like they'd just stepped off the cover of Forbes or Vogue, depending on their tax bracket. I'd spent 3 weeks hunting down this necklace, a limited edition piece from some hotshot designer in Milan whose name I couldn't pronounce without sounding like I was clearing my throat. The kind of jewelry that costs more than most people's cars and comes with its own insurance policy. Clara had mentioned it exactly once, in passing, while scrolling through some fashion magazine during breakfast 6 months ago. But hey, that's what good husbands do, right? We remember the random stuff our wives say, and then move heaven and earth to make it happen. The silver wrapping paper had taken me 20 minutes to get right. I'm a tech guy. I can write code that makes millions, but apparently gift wrapping is where my talents hit a brick wall. Still, it looked decent enough, tied with this ridiculous ribbon that cost more per foot than most people spend on lunch. As I moved through the crowd, nodding at familiar faces and dodging air kisses from people whose names I'd forgotten 5 seconds after meeting them, I started picking up on the vibe. There was this electric current running through the room, like everyone was in on some joke I hadn't heard yet. Conversations would stop mid-sentence when I passed, then resume in hushed, excited whispers. Classic party behavior when drama's about to go down. The laughter started before I saw anything. Not the polite, champagne bubble giggling you'd expect at a charity gala, but the kind of raw, ugly laughter that makes your stomach drop. The sound people make when they're watching someone else's life implode in real time. I followed the noise toward the front of the ballroom, where a small stage had been set up, probably for the evening's speeches about whatever cause we were supposedly supporting this time. That's when I saw him. Alexander Pierce, 6'2" of perfectly sculpted arrogance, down on one knee like some kind of rom-com hero. Except this wasn't Netflix, and I wasn't watching from my couch with a bag of Cheetos. He had a microphone in his hand, because of course he did, and his voice was carrying across the entire ballroom with crystal clarity. "Will you leave your poor, impotent husband and marry me?" The words hit me like a freight train made of pure humiliation. Poor, impotent. I'd made this man richer just by existing in the same tech ecosystem as him. My patents alone had probably funded his last yacht. And impotent? Well, that was just factually incorrect, but apparently we were playing fast and loose with the truth tonight. The crowd was eating it up. 400 of Manhattan's finest, all unified in their collective enjoyment of my public destruction. I could see phones coming out, because nothing says I was here like filming someone's marriage dissolving in high definition. Social media was about to have a field day, but the real gut punch was still coming. Clara, my wife of 7 years, the woman who'd stood in our kitchen that morning asking if I thought her dress made her look fat, the same person I'd bought a ridiculously expensive necklace for, looked down at Pierce with this smile I'd never seen before. Not the smile she gave me when I brought her coffee in bed, or the one she wore during our wedding photos. This was something else entirely. Something that made my chest feel like someone had reached in and scooped out everything important. "Yes," she said, clear as day, loud enough for the microphone to catch. The roar that followed was deafening. Applause, cheers, whistles, like they'd just witnessed the Super Bowl touchdown instead of the systematic destruction of my life. I stood there, still holding that stupid gift box, watching my wife accept a proposal from another man while hundreds of people celebrated like it was the entertainment highlight of their year. Pierce stood up, swept Clara into some dramatic Hollywood kiss, and the crowd went absolutely wild. Someone near me actually hooped. Another person started a slow clap that quickly became thunderous applause. I felt like I was watching it all happen to someone else, like I'd accidentally walked into the wrong movie theater and couldn't find the exit. The smart play would have been to storm out, maybe throw the gift box at Pierce's perfectly styled head, definitely cause some kind of scene that would at least give me the satisfaction of ruining their moment. That's what they were expecting. Hell, that's what they were hoping for. Nothing entertains rich people quite like watching someone else lose their shit in public. But here's the thing about being in tech for 15 years. You learn to play the long game. You learn that the best revenge isn't served hot. It's served methodically, systematically, and with the kind of precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker weep with joy. So instead of giving them the meltdown they wanted, the dramatic confrontation they were all secretly recording on their phones, I did something that probably confused the hell out of everyone in that room. I turned around. No shouting, no scene, no thrown objects or dramatic declarations. I just pivoted on my heel like I was leaving a particularly boring board meeting and started walking toward the exit. The gift box stayed firmly in my hands because damned if I was going to leave behind a 3-month salary's worth of Italian craftsmanship for these vultures to pick over. The crowd's energy shifted as I moved. You could feel the confusion rippling through the room like a wave. This wasn't the script they'd expected. Where was the rage? The tears? The public breakdown that would give them something to gossip about for months? I kept walking, past the champagne fountain that probably cost more than most people's annual rent, past the ice sculptures that were already starting to melt under the heat of everyone's anticipation, past the string quartet that had stopped playing to watch the drama unfold. My footsteps echoed on the marble, steady, deliberate, completely unbothered. Behind me, I could hear Pierce trying to restart the party atmosphere, his voice booming through the microphone about love conquering all and new beginnings. Classic CEO move. When in doubt, give a speech. But even his practiced charisma couldn't quite cover the awkward energy I'd left in my wake. The doorman, different guy than usual, probably hired special for tonight, opened the massive brass doors for me with a look of professional confusion. I nodded my thanks and stepped out into the cool Manhattan night, where the city's honest chaos felt refreshingly real compared to the manufactured drama I'd just escaped. My Uber was already waiting. I called it the moment I heard Pierce's voice on that microphone, because I may be a lot of things, but stupid isn't one of them. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror as I settled into the back seat, probably wondering why someone was leaving such a fancy party so early, still clutching a silver gift box like it contained the secrets of the universe. Rough night? He asked, because Uber drivers in New York have apparently never met a personal boundary they couldn't cross. Getting better by the minute, I told him, and meant it. As we pulled away from the Grand Meridian, I caught a glimpse of the ballroom through the massive windows. The party was back in full swing, Pierce and Clara probably already planning their future while the crowd celebrated their successful humiliation of the guy who'd just walked out. They thought they'd won something tonight. Poor bastards had no idea what was coming. The gift box sat in my lap, still perfectly wrapped, still unopened. Inside was a necklace that Clara would never wear, bought by a husband who apparently no longer existed. But that was fine. I had other plans for my money now. Better plans. Plans that didn't involve funding my own public humiliation or buying jewelry for women who thought poor and impotent were accurate descriptions of the man who'd built their entire lifestyle from scratch. The city lights blurred past the window as we headed uptown, and for the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: clarity. Tonight had been a gift, in its own twisted way. Clara and Pierce had just handed me the justification I needed to do what I'd been too polite, too civilized, too stupidly loyal to do before. They wanted to play games with my life? Perfect. I'd been playing games since before Pierce learned how to tie his first necktie, and I'd never lost one yet. The real party was just getting started. My penthouse felt different when I walked in. Not physically. The same ridiculously expensive furniture Clara had insisted on was still there. The same pretentious art pieces that cost more than most people's houses were still hanging on the walls like silent judgments. But the energy had shifted. The place felt lighter somehow, like someone had finally opened a window in a room that had been slowly suffocating for years. I tossed the silver gift box onto the kitchen counter without ceremony, letting it land with a satisfying thud next to a bowl of fruit that probably cost $50 because everything in our, scratch that, my life had to be organic, artisanal, and Instagram-worthy. The necklace could stay wrapped forever for all I cared. Maybe I'd turn it into a paperweight, or a very expensive reminder of my own stupidity. The marble countertops gleamed under the recessed lighting, reflecting my face back at me in a dozen different angles. I looked tired, which made sense considering I'd just watched my marriage implode in front of Manhattan's social elite. But underneath the exhaustion, there was something else. Something that looked suspiciously like relief. I poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan, the good stuff. The bottle Clara always told guests was Michael's little hobby, like collecting 25-year-old scotch was equivalent to building model trains in the basement. Tonight, it wasn't a hobby. Tonight, it was medicinal. The burn felt good going down, honest in a way that nothing else had been for months. Maybe years. I'd been lying to myself for so long about what my marriage had become that I'd forgotten what truth actually tasted like. Turns out, it tastes like expensive whiskey and vindication. My office was at the far end of the penthouse, past the living room that looked like it belonged in Architectural Digest, and the dining room we'd used maybe 6 times in the past year. Clara preferred eating out, being seen, she called it. Networking, she claimed, though I'd started to suspect her networking involved a lot more one-on-one meetings with certain billionaire CEOs than I'd originally thought. The office was the only room in the place that was actually mine. Clara had decorated everything else with the help of some hotshot interior designer whose name she dropped constantly, but my office was off limits. Dark wood, leather chairs, shelves lined with actual books instead of decorative spines, and most importantly, a safe built into the wall behind a painting of the Brooklyn Bridge, because even my safe had to have some style, according to my wife. I sat down at my desk, the same one I'd bought when Clara Jen was still operating out of a cramped office space in Soho, back when Clara was still impressed by my entrepreneurial spirit instead of embarrassed by my lack of social connections. The wood was scarred from years of late nights, coffee rings, and the occasional moment of frustration when code refused to cooperate. Real wear, honest wear, not the fake distressing you pay extra for at overpriced furniture stores. The safe opened with a series of beeps, and I pulled out the black leather folder that had been sitting there for 3 years, untouched but not forgotten. The label read Primary Assets in my own handwriting, applied with a label maker on one of those nights when I couldn't sleep and decided to organize my life like it was a filing cabinet. Clara had laughed at me for it. Who needs paper anymore, Michael? Everything's digital now. Turns out, the guy who built his company from the ground up and didn't trust the cloud with his most important documents needs paper. The guy who remembered that lawyers love paper trails and judges prefer physical evidence needs paper. The guy who saw his wife making eyes at other men at charity galas for the past 6 months needs paper. I opened the folder and spread the contents across my desk like I was dealing a very expensive hand of poker. Every document told a story, and together they told the story of how a 24-year-old kid from Queens with a computer science degree and too much ambition had built something worth $357 million. The original incorporation papers for Clarigen Technologies, filed 7 years ago when I was still naive enough to think love and business mixed well. My signature, Clara's signature, and a witness signature from my college roommate, who'd driven over at midnight to make it official. Clara owned 49%, I owned 51%. Seemed fair at the time. Seemed romantic, even. What wasn't in those original papers was the story of everything that came after. The patent applications I'd filed solo, working 18-hour days in a cramped office while Clara handled business development at lunch meetings that always seemed to involve more martinis than contracts. 23 separate patents, all with my name as the primary inventor, all generating revenue that had funded our lifestyle, our penthouse, our ridiculous grocery bills. The bank statements painted an even clearer picture. The initial funding for Clarigen had come from my savings, my student loan money, my grandmother's inheritance that she'd left specifically for me to chase my dreams. Not our dreams, my dreams. Gran had been smart enough to put that in writing. Bless her practical heart. $200,000, every penny documented and traced directly to company operations. Then came the investment rounds. Series A, Series B, Series C. Each one negotiated and closed by me while Clara handled public relations. The investors' names were all there in black and white, along with the contracts that spelled out exactly who owned what. The math was simple, even if the legal language was dense. Michael Chin owned 90% of Clarigen Technologies. Clara Monroe owned 10%, mostly as a gesture of marital goodwill that was looking pretty stupid in hindsight. I pulled out my laptop and opened the company's financial management system. The same system I designed, the same one Clara had never bothered to learn how to use. Too complicated, she'd always said. That's what we pay accountants for. Except we didn't pay accountants to make executive decisions about where our money went, and the system required C-level authorization for any transfer over $10,000. Guess who had been happily clicking approve on vacation packages, designer shopping sprees, and mysterious consulting fees without reading the fine print? The first stop was easy, the company travel account. Clara and Pierce had a business retreat scheduled for next week in the Caribbean. Business retreat. Right. Because the best place to discuss quarterly projections is obviously a five-star resort where the only quarterly thing anyone cares about is how many mojitos they can fit into 15 minutes of poolside networking. 2 clicks, 1 authorization code, and suddenly Alexander Pierce was going to be vacationing alone. The resort booking, the first-class flights, the mysterious spa package that cost more than most people's rent, all of it canceled with the cold efficiency that only comes from truly excellent software design. Next up, the party. Tonight's little humiliation spectacular at the Grand Meridian hadn't been cheap. The ballroom rental, the catering, the flowers, the string quartet, the ice sculptures. Everything had been charged to Clarigen's corporate events account, which, according to the receipts, had been Clara's idea of a networking opportunity that would enhance the company's profile in the community. Well, mission accomplished, honey. The company's profile was definitely enhanced, just not in the way you were hoping. Stop payment orders are beautiful things when you know how to file them properly. Each vendor got the same automated message: payment canceled due to unauthorized use of corporate funds. The florist, the caterer, the venue, even the photographer who'd probably captured my moment of public humiliation in high-definition glory. All of them were about to discover that networking events don't pay for themselves. But the real nuclear option was sitting right there in front of me, glowing on my laptop screen like the business equivalent of a big red button marked "Do Not Press." The operational account, $357 million, managed by executive override, requiring my personal authorization for any withdrawal over $50,000. Clara thought she was the CEO. The board thought she was the CEO. Hell, half the tech blogs in Manhattan thought she was the CEO. But being the public face of a company and actually running it are two very different things, and the difference is usually measured in who controls the money. I'd built multiple fail-safes into the system, partly because I'm paranoid and partly because I'd watched too many startups get destroyed by internal politics. Every major decision required 2 signatures, mine and Clara's. Every financial transfer needed executive authorization. Every change to company structure needed board approval. It was bulletproof, assuming both executives were operating in good faith. Turns out, good faith is harder to find than I'd thought. The freeze took exactly 30 seconds to implement. 1 dialog box, 1 confirmation screen, 1 final click, and suddenly Clarigen Technologies was operating under emergency financial protocols. No transfers, no payments, no access to operational funds without direct authorization from the primary stakeholder. That would be me, in case anyone was wondering. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails piling up like digital snow. Clara's name flashed on the screen, then Pierce's, then numbers I didn't recognize but could probably guess. The party was probably still going strong, but somewhere in the Grand Meridian ballroom, someone was getting very bad news about their credit cards. I turned the phone face down and poured another scotch. Outside, Manhattan glittered like a circuit board, millions of lights representing millions of lives, most of them more honest than the one I'd been living for the past few years. The city never slept, which was perfect because I had a feeling I'd be up for a while. The folders sat open on my desk, papers scattered like evidence in a crime scene. Which, in a way, they were. Clara and Pierce had committed the perfect crime. They'd stolen my life, my dignity, and my trust, all while making me pay for the privilege. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that being married to someone meant you owned them, that signing a few papers made you equal partners regardless of who did the actual work. They'd forgotten that in business, like in code, the person who builds the system gets to decide how it runs. And I was just getting started. I woke up at dawn feeling better than I had in months, which probably says something deeply concerning about the state of my marriage. Sorry, former marriage, but I wasn't in the mood for self-analysis. The morning light streaming through my floor-to-ceiling windows felt different somehow, cleaner, like someone had finally washed away months of accumulated bullshit from the glass. My phone looked like it had survived a digital apocalypse. 47 missed calls, 83 text messages, and enough voicemails to fill a small novel about betrayal, panic, and what I could only assume was a lot of very creative swearing. Clara's name dominated the call log like a desperate ex trying to explain why she'd keyed your car, followed by Pierce, our CFO Janet Morrison, 3 different board members, and, because this nightmare couldn't get any more surreal, my mother-in-law. Donna Monroe calling me was like receiving a personal invitation to my own execution. That woman had never liked me, never thought I was good enough for her precious daughter, never missed an opportunity to mention how much more successful Pierce was at dinner parties. The fact that she was calling now, probably to gloat about last night's public humiliation, was just the cherry on top of this whole shitshow Sunday. I turned the phone face down and went to make coffee instead. Real coffee, not the pretentious single-origin, small-batch, artisanal nonsense that Clara insisted on buying from some hipster cafe in Brooklyn where they charged $15 for what was essentially hot bean water with an attitude problem. Just good old-fashioned dark roast that could wake the dead and didn't require a fucking thesis on terroir to justify its existence. The kitchen felt enormous without Clara's morning routine cluttering it up. No yoga mats spread across the marble floors. No blender full of whatever green smoothie was trending on her Instagram feed that week. No passive-aggressive notes about whose turn it was to replace the water filter. Just me, my coffee, and the satisfying silence of a life that was finally my own. I'd spent the night doing math, which sounds boring until you realize that math, when applied correctly, can be the most devastating weapon in the world. Clara thought she'd destroyed me last night, but she'd actually just handed me the justification I needed to use every legal tool in my considerable arsenal. The numbers didn't lie. I own 90% of a company worth more than some small country's GDP, and I just locked down every penny of it. The best part? It was all completely legal. Bulletproof, actually. I'd learned a long time ago that the difference between revenge and justice is usually just a matter of paperwork, and I'd always been very, very good at paperwork. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Patrick from the front desk, which meant someone was downstairs trying to get up to see me. Given the current state of my social calendar, this couldn't be good news. "Morning, Mr. Chun." Patrick's voice crackled through the intercom with the kind of professional concern that only comes from years of dealing with Manhattan's elite during their various personal crises. "Got a young lady down here, Elena Vargas. Says she works for your wife? She's, He paused, clearly searching for diplomatic language. "She's pretty upset, sir." Elena, Clara's assistant, 26 years old, fresh out of Columbia with an MBA she'd probably never get to use because she'd hitched her wagon to the wrong star. Smart kid, but with terrible judgment in employers. I felt a little bad about what was probably happening to her right now. She'd gotten caught in the crossfire of a war she didn't even know was being fought. "Send her up, Patrick." "Thanks." I had just enough time to put on actual clothes. Apparently greeting crying employees in pajamas sends the wrong message about professional boundaries, before Elena burst through my front door like a hurricane made of panic and designer handbags. She looked exactly like someone who'd just discovered that her boss's seemingly perfect life was actually a house of cards built on quicksand. Her usually immaculate hair was escaping from its ponytail. Her makeup was smudged like she'd been crying for hours, and she was clutching a Starbucks cup with the desperate intensity of someone who'd already had way too much caffeine and was about to have more anyway. "Mr. Chun, thank God you're here," she babbled, words tumbling over each other like water through a broken dam. There's been some kind of technical glitch with the company accounts, and nobody can access anything. And the payroll is frozen, and the investor meeting this morning got canceled because the conference room booking didn't go through, and Clara's Amex got declined at Starbucks. And she's completely freaking out because Pierce's credit card got declined too, and their Caribbean trip got canceled. And Elena, I interrupted, holding up a hand. Breathe. She sucked in a lungful of air like she'd been underwater, then looked at me with the kind of desperate hope that people usually reserve for emergency room doctors or tax attorneys. Can you fix it? Clara said it was probably just a technical glitch, something with the servers maybe, and that you'd be able to sort it out in a few minutes because you built all the systems and… Did Clara send you here? The question seemed to deflate her a little. Yes, sir. She said you'd want to know about the technical issues right away, and that you'd probably want to get everything back online before it affected business operations. Technical issues. That was rich. Clara thought this was a bug in the system instead of a feature working exactly as designed. She'd spent so many years as the public face of Clarigen that she'd forgotten who actually built the damn thing in the first place. Elena, I said carefully, did you see what happened at the party last night? Her face went through about 6 different expressions in the space of 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, embarrassment, and finally a kind of sick understanding that made me feel genuinely sorry for her. She lowered her eyes and nodded, suddenly very interested in the pattern on my marble floor. I see. I walked over to my desk and pulled out a manila envelope I'd prepared while she was on her way up. Sometimes it pays to be 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. I need you to deliver this to Clara. She has 24 hours to respond. No extensions, no negotiations. No, I need more time to think about it. 24 hours. Elena took the envelope like it might explode in her hands, which, considering its contents, wasn't that far from the truth. What should I tell her about the accounts? About the payroll? About the meetings? Tell her the truth, I said. Tell her there are no technical glitches. Tell her the system is working exactly as designed. Tell her that sometimes when you burn bridges, you discover you're standing on the wrong side of the river. She blinked at me, clearly trying to process the metaphor, while simultaneously dealing with the reality that her comfortable job had just evaporated around her like morning mist. Mr. Chun, I don't understand. What's going on? I poured myself another cup of coffee and considered how to explain corporate warfare to someone who'd probably spent the last few years believing that business was just a series of lunch meetings and PowerPoint presentations. Elena was collateral damage in this whole mess, but she was also old enough to figure out which way the wind was blowing. Elena, how long have you been working for Clara? 2 years, sir. And in those 2 years, how many major business decisions have you seen her make without consulting me first? She thought about it for a moment, her face cycling through the kind of realizations that usually come with a hefty dose of uncomfortable truth. I don't think I've seen her make any major decisions without you, sir. That's because she can't. Clarigen isn't Clara's company, Elena. It never was. She's been the spokesperson, the public face, the person who smiles for the cameras and makes small talk at charity galas. But the code, the patents, the funding, the actual business decisions that matter, that's all been me from day one. I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she started connecting dots that had probably been sitting right in front of her for months. The way Clara always deferred to me on technical matters, the way she needed my signature on everything important, the way she'd panic whenever I traveled for more than a few days. So when she and Mr. Pierce… Elena couldn't quite finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. When she decided to humiliate me in front of 400 people while asking another man to marry her. Yeah, that was a pretty clear signal that our business partnership was over. I sealed the envelope and handed it to her. This makes it official. Elena stood there for a moment, envelope in hand, looking like someone who'd just realized that the ground she'd been standing on was actually quicksand. What happens to the company? What happens to everyone's jobs? That depends entirely on how Clara responds to what's in that envelope. But Elena… I waited until she looked me in the eye. Whatever happens, it won't be a technical glitch. She nodded slowly, understanding finally dawning on her face like a particularly brutal sunrise. 24 hours? 24 hours, I confirmed. And Elena, when you give this to Clara, you might want to start updating your resume. Just a friendly suggestion. She tucked the envelope into her purse like she was handling radioactive material, which wasn't that far from the truth. Yes, sir. I'll deliver this right away. After she left, I stood at my window looking out at the city, coffee cup in hand, feeling the particular satisfaction that comes from watching a plan unfold exactly as designed. Somewhere across town, Clara was probably still convinced that this was all some kind of mistake, some technical problem that could be fixed with a phone call, or maybe a really good IT consultant. She was about to learn the difference between being the face of a company and actually owning it. The timer had started, 24 hours and counting. After Elena left with that envelope clutched in her trembling hands like a diplomatic pouch containing nuclear launch codes, I sat down at my laptop and did what I do best. I wrote code. Except this time, instead of algorithms and user interfaces, I was coding Clara's new reality, line by line, clause by clause, with the kind of mathematical precision that had made me millions and was about to unmake her entire world. The legal pad in front of me looked innocent enough, just yellow paper and black ink, the same tools lawyers have been using to destroy lives for centuries. But what I was drafting wasn't just a contract. It was a masterpiece of strategic warfare disguised as corporate restructuring. Every sentence was a scalpel, every paragraph a surgical strike designed to cut away the cancer that my marriage had become while leaving the healthy tissue of my company intact. I started with the nuclear option, because why dance around the inevitable? Clara Monroe resigns as Chief Executive Officer of Clarigen Technologies, effective immediately upon signature of this agreement. Simple, direct, and about as subtle as a brick through a window. No graceful transition period, no face-saving, stepping down to pursue other opportunities, bullshit. Just a clean amputation of the infected limb. Clara had spent 7 years building her identity around being a tech CEO, even though she couldn't code her way out of a paper bag with a team of MIT graduates and an unlimited coffee budget. She loved the title, the respect it commanded at dinner parties, the way people's voices changed when she introduced herself as the head of a multi-million-dollar company. Watching her lose that was going to be almost as satisfying as watching Pierce try to explain to his investors why his newest acquisition just evaporated like morning mist. Next up, Alexander Pierce is permanently banned from any business involvement, consulting arrangements, or contractual relationships with Clarigen Technologies or any of its subsidiary companies. I took extra time crafting that one, making sure the language was airtight enough to survive any legal challenge Pierce's army of lawyers might throw at it. The man who'd humiliated me in front of Manhattan's elite was about to discover that public embarrassment was a luxury that came with a very expensive price tag. Pierce probably thought he was getting a 2-for-1 deal. Clara and her company, a ready-made empire handed to him on a silver platter along with a grateful wife who'd never asked too many questions about his business practices. Surprise, asshole. The only thing you're getting is a front-row seat to watching your new fiancé's life implode in real time. The third clause was where things got personal. Michael Chin assumes the roles of Chief Executive Officer and Financial Oversight Director, with unlimited veto power over any corporate expenditure exceeding $10,000. Translation: every coffee purchase, every lunch meeting, every designer handbag Clara tried to pass off as a business expense would now require my personal approval. I'd spent years watching our company credit cards get treated like some kind of magical money fountain that never ran dry. Spa treatments disguised as wellness consultations, shopping sprees labeled as market research, vacations that somehow qualified as industry networking events. All of it funded by algorithms I'd written during 18-hour coding marathons while Clara handled the creative side of the business from various 5-star resorts. The fourth term was where the math got really interesting. Clara Monroe agrees to repay the sum of $357 million in structured installments over a period of 3 years, beginning 30 days from the date of this agreement. I'd done the calculations 3 times to make sure I had it right. Every penny she'd spent, every dollar she'd wasted, every cent that had funded her lifestyle while I built the actual business, all of it itemized, categorized, and ready for collection. $357 million. The number had a beautiful symmetry to it, like a piece of mathematical poetry written in corporate legalese. It represented every late night I'd spent debugging code while she attended charity galas, every weekend I'd worked while she got spa treatments, every vacation I'd missed while she networked with Manhattan's social elite. The fifth clause was about truth-telling, which seemed appropriate given the circumstances. Clara Monroe will issue a public statement within 72 hours, acknowledging Michael Chun as the founder, primary architect, and majority stakeholder of Clarigen Technologies, including full credit for all proprietary algorithms, patent applications, and strategic business decisions made between 2018 and 2025. 7 years of taking credit for my work, 7 years of letting tech journalists write articles about her visionary leadership, while I stayed in the background like some kind of corporate ghostwriter. The woman who could barely use Excel without calling IT support had somehow become the face of cutting-edge artificial intelligence development. Time to set the record straight with the kind of public correction that would make Wikipedia editors weep with joy. Clause number 6 was about lifestyle adjustments. All corporate benefits previously extended to Clara Monroe are hereby terminated, including, but not limited to, private jet access, unlimited corporate credit cards, executive assistant services, and preferential media access arrangements. No more first-class flights to conferences where she'd give speeches about innovations she didn't understand. No more corporate cards that magically paid for everything from groceries to vacations to that ridiculous monthly flower arrangement that cost more than most people's car payments. No more Elena running around Manhattan handling the 1,000 tiny details that made Clara's life run smoothly while she took credit for everyone else's work. The seventh and final term was my personal favorite. Clara Monroe agrees to a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement regarding all internal Clarigen Technologies business practices, strategic decisions, and proprietary information for a period of 5 years from the date of this agreement. This includes, but is not limited to, memoir publication, media interviews, podcast appearances, speaking engagements, and any other form of public commentary regarding her former role or relationship with the company. 5 years of silence. 5 years where she couldn't write tell-all books about her journey as a female tech entrepreneur, couldn't give interviews to business magazines about overcoming challenges in a male-dominated industry, couldn't turn our divorce into some kind of feminist rallying cry about corporate sexism. The woman who'd built her entire career on talking about work she didn't do was about to discover what it felt like to have nothing to say. I read through the terms one more time, checking each clause for loopholes, ambiguities, or emotional language that might give Clara's lawyers something to work with. The document was clean, professional, and utterly devastating. Exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent 15 years learning that the difference between winning and losing in business was usually just a matter of reading the fine print. The beauty of it was that everything was completely legal. Harsh, maybe. Career-ending, definitely. But legal. Clara had signed contracts 7 years ago that gave me majority control of the company, and she'd been spending corporate money like it was her personal checking account, while publicly humiliating the person who actually owned the business. Any decent lawyer would take one look at this document and advise their client to sign it immediately before I decided to get creative with the terms. I printed 7 copies. 1 for Clara, 1 for my lawyer, 1 for the company files, and 4 extras because in my experience, important documents had a tendency to disappear at precisely the wrong moment. Each page came out of my laser printer with crisp, professional formatting that would look great in court if things went sideways. The envelope sat on my desk like a loaded weapon, which in many ways it was. Inside was the complete restructuring of Clara's life, the mathematical precision of justice, served with corporate efficiency. She'd spent the last 12 hours thinking this was all some kind of technical glitch, some temporary inconvenience that could be fixed with the right phone call, or maybe a romantic gesture designed to smooth things over. Poor Clara had no idea that she wasn't dealing with a technical problem. She was dealing with a comprehensive solution to the problem of being married to someone who thought public humiliation was an acceptable form of entertainment. I sealed the envelope with the kind of satisfaction that usually came with shipping a perfect product or solving an impossible coding problem. Elena would deliver this to Clara. Clara would read it with whatever was left of her morning coffee, and then the real negotiations would begin. Except there wouldn't be any negotiations. There would just be acceptance, signatures, and the systematic dismantling of everything she thought she'd built on the foundation of my work. The clock on my computer showed 11:47 a.m. Clara had until 11:47 a.m. tomorrow to sign these papers and begin her new life as a private citizen with a very large debt and a very small future. 24 hours and counting. Time to see if she was better at math than she'd ever been at actual business. I'd been expecting the knock since about 10 o'clock, which was roughly when Clara would have finished her third bottle of wine and moved past the "this is just a misunderstanding" phase into full-blown panic mode. What I hadn't expected was for her to wait until 11:30 p.m., which showed either remarkable self-control or a desperate attempt to find some other solution before resorting to begging her soon-to-be ex-husband for mercy. The pounding on my door wasn't the polite, measured knock of someone who still had their dignity intact. This was the frantic hammering of someone who'd just realized that their entire life was built on quicksand and the tide was coming in fast. 3 sharp bursts. Pause. 3 more bursts. Pause. The rhythm of genuine desperation mixed with expensive wine and the kind of mistakes that keep you up at night for the rest of your natural life. I took my time getting to the door, partly because making Clara wait felt like a small but satisfying form of justice, and partly because I wanted to savor this moment. For 7 years, she'd held all the power in our relationship, the social connections, the public recognition, the ability to make me feel like a supporting character in my own life. Tonight, the tables had finally turned, and I was going to enjoy every second of watching her realize it. When I opened the door, Clara looked like she'd been hit by a tornado made entirely of consequences. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, escaping from whatever expensive updo she'd worn to impress Pierce's social circle. Her makeup, usually applied with the precision of a professional artist, was streaked down her cheeks in mascara rivers that told the story of several hours' worth of crying. The designer dress from last night, the one she'd probably picked out specifically to look stunning while destroying my life, was wrinkled and stained with what looked like wine and tears and the general messiness of a life falling apart in real time. But it was her eyes that really told the story. Gone was the confident gleam of someone who thought she held all the cards, replaced by the wild, desperate look of someone who'd just discovered that the cards were actually owned by someone else entirely. She looked like a woman who'd spent the last 12 hours calling lawyers, accountants, and anyone else who might be able to explain how her perfect plan had turned into a perfect disaster. "Please, Michael," she whispered, and her voice was so different from the triumphant tone she'd used last night that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You can't destroy us like this." Us. That was rich. There was no us anymore, hadn't been for months, maybe years. Last night had just made it official, given it the kind of public ceremony that Manhattan society would be talking about for decades. But Clara had apparently missed the memo about our relationship status, probably because she'd been too busy planning her future with Pierce to notice that her present was built entirely on my goodwill and corporate generosity. I stepped aside and let her into the penthouse, partly because having this conversation in the hallway would give the neighbors something to gossip about for months, and partly because I wanted her to see what she was losing. This place, with its $1 million view and ridiculous amenities, had been purchased with money I'd earned writing code while she networked at charity lunches. Every piece of furniture, every piece of art, every carefully selected detail that made this place look like it belonged in Architectural Digest. All of it funded by algorithms she couldn't have debugged with a team of consultants and an unlimited budget. Clara stumbled into the living room like she was seeing it for the first time, which in a way, she probably was. She'd lived here for 3 years, but she'd never really understood what it represented. The tangible proof that behind every successful woman was a man who'd done the actual work while she took the credit. "You can't be serious about those terms," she said, collapsing onto the Italian leather sofa that cost more than most people's annual salary. $357 million? Michael, that's impossible. Nobody has that kind of money just lying around. I poured myself a scotch, the same bottle I'd been working on since yesterday, though it felt like a lifetime ago, and considered how to explain basic economics to someone who'd spent the last 7 years treating corporate finances like a bottomless ATM. "Clara, you spent $357 million of my money. The math isn't complicated. Our money," she corrected automatically, then seemed to realize how pathetic that sounded given the circumstances. The company money. It was for business expenses, networking, building relationships. Building relationships. I sat down across from her, far enough away to avoid any desperate physical contact, close enough to see the exact moment when reality finally penetrated whatever fantasy world she'd been living in. Is that what we're calling your affair with Pierce now? Relationship building? Her face crumpled like a piece of paper someone had thrown in the trash, then tried to smooth out again. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Pierce and we connected at that conference in Miami, and he made me feel important, powerful, like I was more than just your wife. You were more than just my wife, I said, and meant it. You were my business partner, my co-founder, the person I trusted with half my life's work. I took a sip of scotch and let that sink in. And you threw it all away for what? A guy who proposed to you as a public humiliation stunt? Real romantic, Clara. Real classy. She started crying again. The ugly kind of crying that happens when someone realizes they've made a mistake so enormous that there's no way to fix it, no way to take it back, no way to pretend it never happened. I never meant for it to go that far. Pierce said it would be fun, a way to make you realize how much you needed me. He said you'd fight for me, that you'd make a scene, that it would prove how much you cared. So this was all some kind of test. I laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. You destroyed our marriage in front of 400 people to see if I'd put on a show for your entertainment? It wasn't like that, she started, but I cut her off. It was exactly like that, Clara. You and Pierce turned my life into performance art, except you forgot that the person you were performing for actually owned the theater. I leaned forward, making sure she could see exactly how serious I was. You erased me with my own money. You used my algorithms, my patents, my work to build a platform for your own ego, and then you used that platform to humiliate me in the most public way possible. This isn't a mistake, Clara. It's strategy, and I play strategy better than anyone you've ever met. She looked around the penthouse like she was seeing it for the last time, which she probably was. Her gaze lingered on the art, the furniture, the view of Central Park that had cost an extra $2 million just for the privilege of looking at trees from 40 stories up. All of it built on work she'd never done, funded by success she'd never earned, purchased with money that had never really been hers. The terms are unreasonable, she said finally, her voice small and defeated. Nobody could live with those restrictions. The money, the public statement, the non-disclosure agreement. You're trying to destroy my entire future. I'm not trying to destroy anything, I said. I'm just making sure that your future is based on your own work instead of mine. Novel concept, I know. She sat there for a long time, processing what that meant, understanding finally dawning on her face like a particularly brutal sunrise. Without my company, my money, my work to hide behind, Clara Monroe was just another failed entrepreneur with good connections and an expensive education. Without the corporate credit cards and executive assistant and private jet access, she was just another ex-wife with a large debt and a limited skill set. You recorded the proposal, she said suddenly, looking up at me with something that might have been hope. That video, if it gets out, it would destroy Pierce too. His investors, his board, they'd crucify him for the publicity. You could use it as leverage, force him to help me pay the settlement. I pulled out my phone and showed her the video I'd taken last night. Pierce on one knee, the crowd laughing, her saying yes with that smile I'd never seen before. The whole thing captured in high definition, ready to go viral with the press of a button. Then I deleted it. What are you doing? She gasped, reaching for the phone like she could somehow restore the deleted file through sheer desperation. That was your leverage. Your proof. I don't need proof, I told her. I have something better. I have ownership papers, patent filings, bank records, and 7 years' worth of documentation showing exactly who built this company and who just pretended to run it. I put the phone back in my pocket. Pierce can keep his reputation. I'm not interested in destroying him. I'm interested in making sure you understand that actions have consequences. Clara looked at me like I'd just grown a second head. You're not going to ruin Pierce? After what he did to you? Pierce is a symptom, not the disease. He saw an opportunity to acquire a successful company through marriage, and he took it. Smart business move, actually, except he didn't do his due diligence on the ownership structure. I finished my scotch and set the glass down with finality. You're the one who betrayed 7 years of partnership for a man you barely know. You're the one who turned our marriage into a public spectacle. You're the one who spent our money like it was monopoly currency while I did the actual work of building something meaningful." She crumbled then, really and truly crumbled, her shoulders shaking with the kind of sobs that come from deep inside, from the place where people keep their worst mistakes and their biggest regrets. "I'll sign," she whispered through her tears. "I'll sign your fucking papers. But you're destroying me, Michael. You know that, right? You're destroying my entire life." "No," I said, standing up to signal that this conversation was over. "I'm just making sure your life reflects your actual contributions to our partnership." I walked to the door and held it open for her. "You have until tomorrow at noon to sign those papers, Clara. After that, the terms get significantly worse." She walked past me like a woman going to her own execution, which in a way, she was. At the door, she turned back one more time, mascara streaked, dignity abandoned, looking for any sign that I might reconsider, that this might all be some elaborate negotiation tactic that could still be resolved with the right combination of tears and promises. "This isn't you, Michael," she said. "This cold, calculated revenge, it's not who you are." "You're right," I told her and closed the door. "It's who I've become. And frankly, I like him better than the guy who let you spend 7 years taking credit for his work." The penthouse felt different after she left. Lighter, cleaner, like someone had finally opened all the windows and let the stale air escape. I poured another scotch and stood at the window, looking out at Manhattan's glittering skyline, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The kind that comes from finally matching your actions to your principles, from stopping the pretense that being nice was more important than being honest. Clara had less than 12 hours to sign those papers. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I was genuinely curious to see what she'd choose. Friday morning hit Manhattan like a freight train made of caffeine and corporate anxiety, and I was dressed for war. Navy blue Tom Ford suit, Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's rent, and a tie that Clara had bought me for our 5th anniversary, back when she still pretended to care about the details that made a marriage work. The irony of wearing her gift to her professional execution wasn't lost on me, but then again, I'd always appreciated good symbolism. The elevator ride to the 43rd floor felt longer than usual, probably because I was sharing it with 3 junior executives who kept glancing at me like I was carrying a bomb. Which, in a way, I was. The bomb was made of legal documents and mathematical precision, but it was still going to level everything these people thought they knew about corporate hierarchy at Clarigen Technologies. The glass-walled boardroom looked like a fish tank full of very expensive, very nervous fish. 12 board members sat around a conference table that had cost more than some people's houses, each one trying to look calm, while simultaneously calculating how this morning's meeting was going to affect their stock options, their reputations, and their ability to explain to their spouses why they'd backed the wrong horse in what was obviously a very complicated game of corporate chess. Janet Morrison, our CFO, was shuffling papers at the head of the table like she was dealing cards in the world's most expensive poker game. She'd been with the company for 4 years, had an MBA from Wharton, and a nervous habit of clicking her pen when she was stressed. This morning, the pen clicking sounded like a metronome counting down to an execution. Clara sat at the far end of the table, as far away from me as the room's geometry would allow. She looked like she'd spent the night in a blender set to career destruction. Pale, hollow-eyed, wearing a black dress that was probably supposed to look professional, but mostly just made her look like she was attending her own funeral. Which, in a corporate sense, she was. The signed papers sat in a manila envelope in front of her, every page initialed, every clause accepted, every term agreed to with the resigned desperation of someone who'd finally realized that they'd been playing poker with someone who owned the entire casino. She'd beaten my noon deadline by exactly 17 minutes, which showed either impressive efficiency or the kind of panic that makes people sign documents without reading them twice. I walked to my seat with the deliberate pace of someone who knew that every eye in the room was calculating angles, measuring distances, trying to figure out exactly how much power had just shifted and in which direction. The soft sound of my footsteps on the marble floor was the only noise in a room full of people who'd suddenly realized that everything they thought they knew about this company was about to be rewritten. "Good morning," I said, settling into my chair with the kind of calm that comes from holding all the cards in a game where everyone else is still trying to figure out what game they're playing. Thank you all for being here on such short notice. The board members exchanged glances like they were at a tennis match and couldn't figure out who was serving next. These were smart people, investment bankers, tech executives, former CEOs who'd built and sold companies worth more than some country's GDP. But right now, they looked like freshmen who'd walked into the wrong classroom and were too embarrassed to leave. Before we begin, I continued, pulling out my own copy of Clara's signed agreement. I want to make sure everyone understands exactly what we're discussing today. As of this morning, there have been some significant changes to Clarigen's executive structure. Clara looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair, maybe tunnel straight down through the floor, and emerge somewhere in New Jersey where nobody knew her name or her recent history of spectacularly bad decision-making. But she was trapped in this room, trapped in this moment, trapped in the consequences of thinking that public humiliation was an acceptable form of corporate strategy. Effective immediately, I announced, my voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from actually knowing what you're talking about. Clara Monroe has resigned from her position as Chief Executive Officer of Clarigen Technologies. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a stock price drop. Janet's pin clicking stopped mid-click, frozen in the air like a conductor's baton at the end of a symphony. 3 board members looked like they were having simultaneous heart attacks, which was probably just their portfolios flashing before their eyes. Additionally, I continued, because why stop at one bombshell when you can detonate the entire arsenal? I will be assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer, as well as the newly created position of Financial Oversight Director, with comprehensive veto authority over all corporate expenditures exceeding $10,000. Now the board members were really starting to sweat. Financial oversight with veto power meant that every country club membership, every corporate retreat, every consulting fee, that had mysteriously found its way into various expense accounts was about to undergo the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for tax audits and criminal investigations. Furthermore, I said, watching their faces cycle through the 5 stages of corporate grief, Alexander Pierce has been permanently banned from any involvement with Clarigen Technologies, including consulting arrangements, partnership discussions, or casual visits to our coffee machine. That last part was my own addition, not technically in the legal documents, but I felt it was important to establish the scope of Pierce's banishment. The man who'd proposed to my wife as a form of public entertainment was about to discover that some theaters don't allow return engagements. Clara finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a croak than actual human speech. I need to make a statement. She stood up slowly, like someone who'd aged about 10 years in the past 48 hours, and looked around the room at faces that had once smiled at her with professional respect and were now regarding her with the kind of cautious sympathy usually reserved for traffic accidents and natural disasters. I want to acknowledge, she began, her voice cracking like thin ice under pressure, that Michael Chun is the founder, primary architect, and majority stakeholder of Clarigen Technologies. He developed our core algorithms, filed our patents, and made the strategic decisions that built this company into what it is today. The board members were now looking back and forth between us like they were watching a very expensive, very slow-motion car crash. This wasn't just a resignation. This was a complete confession, the corporate equivalent of pleading guilty to charges of taking credit for someone else's work while spending their money on personal luxuries. I was the public face of the company, Clara continued, each word seeming to cost her something essential. But Michael was always the actual CEO. The algorithms that power our AI systems, the patents that protect our intellectual property, the business model that generates our revenue, all of that came from his work, his vision, his funding. Janet Morrison looked like someone had just explained quantum physics to her using interpretive dance. She'd been the CFO for 4 years and had apparently never bothered to check who actually owned the company she was helping to run. The other board members were doing the kind of mental calculations that happen when smart people realize they've been fundamentally wrong about something important for a very long time. I take full responsibility, Clara said, for misrepresenting my role in the company's success, and I apologize to the board, to our investors, and to Michael for any confusion my actions may have caused. She sat down abruptly, like someone had cut her strings, and the room fell back into the kind of silence that follows major earthquakes or stock market crashes. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next, what other revelations might be coming, how much more of their understanding of reality was about to be revised. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room, picking up a marker that probably cost more than most people spend on office supplies in a year. Let me show you some numbers that might clarify the situation. The math I wrote on that board told the story of 7 years in corporate shorthand. Revenue generated by Michael Chen's patents, $847 million. Corporate expenses authorized by Clara Monroe, $357 million. Actual business decisions made by Clara Monroe without Michael Chen's input, 0. Actual lines of code written by Clara Monroe, also 0. These numbers represent the foundation of ClaraGen Technologies, I said, turning back to face a room full of people who were finally understanding what they'd been looking at for the past 4 years. Clara has been an excellent spokesperson, a talented networker, and a very effective public representative. But she has never been the CEO in any meaningful sense of that title. I walked back to my seat and pulled out the operational account access cards that I'd printed that morning. As of right now, I'm lifting the emergency financial freeze that's been in place since Wednesday night. All legitimate business operations will resume immediately. All frivolous expenditures will be subject to review under the new oversight protocols. The relief in the room was almost tangible. These people had spent 2 days thinking their company was having some kind of technical meltdown, watching payroll freeze and credit cards get declined while they tried to figure out what kind of crisis they were managing. Now they understood that it hadn't been a crisis at all. It had been a hostile takeover by the person who'd actually owned the company all along. Are there any questions? I asked, though my tone made it clear that this wasn't really a discussion so much as an announcement. Janet raised her hand tentatively, like a student who wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer to her own question. What happens to Clara's equity in the company? Clara retains her 10% ownership stake, I said, though she'll be repaying her unauthorized expenditures according to the settlement agreement she signed this morning. Her equity will serve as collateral for that debt. Translation: Clara would still technically own part of the company, but every penny of profit from that ownership would go directly toward paying back the fortune she'd spent on corporate credit cards and executive perks. She'd be working for free for the next 3 years, assuming the company remained profitable enough to generate the kind of returns that could cover her debt. The meeting ended with the kind of subdued efficiency that follows major power shifts. Board members filed out quietly, probably heading straight to their phones to call lawyers, accountants, and anyone else who might be able to explain how they'd managed to miss such a fundamental misunderstanding about corporate structure. Clara left without making eye contact with anyone, clutching her purse like it contained the last remnants of her professional dignity. I stayed in the boardroom after everyone else left, looking out at Manhattan through the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city conduct its daily business of making and losing fortunes, building and destroying careers, creating and eliminating opportunities with the ruthless efficiency that made capitalism such an elegant system when it worked properly. The coup was complete. ClaraGen Technologies now had leadership that matched its ownership structure, financial oversight that reflected its actual priorities, and a very clear understanding of who had built what and when and how. Clara's reign as fake CEO was over. My actual leadership of the company I'd built from scratch had finally begun, and it felt exactly as satisfying as I'd thought it would. 2 weeks after watching Clara's corporate empire crumble like a sandcastle at high tide, I found myself in Brooklyn, standing outside a converted warehouse that looked like it had seen better decades. The neighborhood was all hipster coffee shops and startup dreams, the kind of place where MIT graduates went to change the world on ramen budgets and pure caffeine. Brightlayer AI occupied the 3rd floor of a building that probably violated half the fire codes in New York, but buzzed with the kind of authentic energy that Clara's polished boardrooms had never managed to capture. No marble floors or Italian leather furniture here, just folding tables covered in laptops, whiteboards covered in algorithms that actually meant something, and the beautiful chaos of people building something real. Leia Chun was 26, barely 5 feet tall, and could debug code that would make senior engineers weep. Clara had dismissed her pitch 6 months ago with a condescending smile and some bullshit about market readiness. Translation: Clara couldn't understand the technology well enough to fake expertise about it at dinner parties. Your AI learns human emotion recognition in real time, I said, watching Leia's team work with the focused intensity that only comes from believing you're solving problems that matter. No training data, no pre-programmed responses, just pure adaptive intelligence. Leia nodded, her eyes lighting up with the kind of passion Clara had never shown for anything that couldn't be photographed for Instagram. Most AI systems are just elaborate pattern matching. We're building something that actually understands context, nuance, genuine human interaction. I pulled out my checkbook. Yes, an actual paper checkbook, because some moments deserve the weight of physical ceremony. $20 million for 40% equity and a board seat. Plus whatever expertise I can provide, which after this week includes a masterclass in corporate restructuring. She stared at the check like it might disappear if she blinked. You're serious? Just like that. Clara taught me something valuable, I said, watching her team celebrate in the background as words spread through the warehouse. The difference between real innovation and expensive performance art. This is real work, Leia. This is the kind of company I should have been building all along. Standing in that warehouse, surrounded by engineers who understood that code was poetry and innovation was art, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. The kind that comes from betting on people who care more about solving problems than looking good while failing to solve them. This was what building actually felt like. Cafe Solstice was Clara's choice, which told me everything I needed to know about her current state of mind. She'd picked the most anonymous coffee shop in Manhattan. No celebrity sightings, no society photographers, just overpriced lattes and the kind of carefully curated anonymity that rich people pay extra for when their lives implode in public. She looked smaller somehow, sitting across from me in a corner booth that probably cost less than her usual lunch meetings. Gone were the designer power suits and the confidence that came from spending other people's money on personal luxuries. Today she was wearing jeans and a sweater that actually looked like she'd bought it herself, with her own credit card, using money she'd actually earned. Here's your first draft, she said, sliding a piece of paper across the table like she was passing state secrets to a foreign agent. I read it and immediately wanted to set it on fire. Shared vision? Mutual respect? Clara, this reads like a fucking Hallmark card written by someone who's never heard of accountability. She flinched at the profanity, which was interesting. The woman who'd publicly humiliated me in front of Manhattan's elite was apparently sensitive about harsh language in coffee shops. This isn't about communication, I continued, pulling out my laptop. This is about credit theft. 7 years of you taking bows for work you didn't do, algorithms you couldn't debug, business decisions you didn't make. I started typing, my fingers moving with the same precision I used for code. We're going to tell the truth, Clara. The whole truth. In simple English that even tech journalists can understand. An hour later, we'd crafted something that would have made any crisis management consultant reach for the hard liquor. Clara admitted she'd been the public face while I built the actual company. She credited me as founder, inventor, and majority stakeholder. She even included an apology for misrepresenting her contributions to Clarigen's success. This will destroy my reputation, she said, staring at the final draft like it was her own death warrant. Your reputation was built on lies, I told her. This just makes it honest. At 8 a.m. the next morning, the statement went live across every platform that mattered. By noon, TechCrunch was calling me the silent genius behind Clarigen's success. Forbes wanted an interview about the real story of tech's most successful partnership. Clara's phone calls went straight to voicemail. Mine wouldn't stop ringing. Finally, the world knew who had built what. 6 months later, I was living in a different world, literally. The Upper West Side apartment was smaller, sunlit, and completely lacking in the pretentious bullshit that had defined my life with Clara. 2 bedrooms, no staff, no marble countertops that cost more than most people's cars. Just windows that actually opened, natural light that didn't require a designer's approval, and the radical concept of living within my actual means instead of someone else's Instagram expectations. Columbia University had offered me a teaching position after the Forbes interview. Apparently, brilliant reclusive tech founder was their ideal faculty brand. 3 days a week, I stood in front of graduate students who actually wanted to learn instead of just network their way to startup funding. It felt like contributing to something meaningful instead of just generating revenue for lifestyle expenses. The apartment building had a doorman named Carlos who knew everyone's names and remembered their birthdays. My neighbors were professors, artists, and people who worked real jobs for honest paychecks. No one cared that I'd built a multi-million-dollar company. They cared that I held the elevator and didn't play music too loud after 10 p.m. Brightlayer was thriving beyond even my optimistic projections. Leia's team had landed contracts with 3 major healthcare systems and 2 Fortune 500 companies. Real clients with real problems, not the vanity projects and celebrity endorsements that Clara had chased for years. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, handwritten on actual paper like some artifact from a more civilized era. Clara had moved to Portland, working at a nonprofit that taught coding to underprivileged kids. Her apartment was small, her salary was modest, and according to her letter, she was finally learning the difference between being important and being authentic. "You tried to teach me that for years," she wrote in her careful script. "I'm sorry it took losing everything to finally understand what you meant." I folded the letter carefully and filed it away. Not forgotten, but finished. My life was moving forward now, measured in genuine accomplishments instead of borrowed glory. The war was over, and surprisingly, peace felt better than victory ever had. Simple living, honest work, and the quiet satisfaction of building something real with people who actually cared about the outcome. Who knew happiness could be so uncomplicated? Walking through the Clarigen office felt like visiting a museum exhibit about my former life. Gone were the champagne fountains and celebrity partnerships that Clara had insisted were essential for brand positioning. No more fake smiles from employees who'd spent years pretending my wife was a tech visionary instead of an expensive spokesperson with good connections and terrible judgment. The office buzzed with actual productivity now. Lean teams building real solutions, engineers solving problems that mattered, developers writing code that would still be elegant 10 years from now. No more meetings about meetings, no more brainstorming sessions that produced nothing but billable hours and catered lunch expenses. At Brightlayer, Leia had just closed a deal with Microsoft that would fund her team's research for the next 3 years. Real money for real innovation, not venture capital disguised as celebrity endorsements. Her algorithms were attracting clients who understood the difference between artificial intelligence and expensive pattern matching. My Columbia students were defending dissertation proposals that would have impressed researchers at MIT. Kids who'd learned to code because they wanted to solve problems, not because they wanted to network their way into tech celebrity. Watching them present their work reminded me why I'd started programming in the first place. The pure joy of making something elegant work perfectly. Back home, I brewed coffee in my own kitchen and looked out at Central Park through windows that opened to actual fresh air. No staff, no pretense, no performance art disguised as domestic life. Just the quiet satisfaction of living honestly, working meaningfully, and choosing my own priorities instead of funding someone else's ego. The war was over. Clara and Pierce had their consequences. She was teaching kids in Portland. He was explaining to investors how his acquisition strategy had backfired so spectacularly. But my victory wasn't their punishment. My victory was freedom. Freedom to build what mattered, to choose what counted, to live without pretending that expensive was the same as valuable. I'd spent 7 years funding someone else's fantasy about what success looked like. Now I was living my own definition of what it actually felt like. Peace, purpose, the quiet triumph of finally matching your life to your values. Some victories don't need audiences. Some wins are worth more than applause. I should have known something was off the second my phone buzzed, and I saw Brandon's name pop up on my screen. We weren't exactly friends. Scratch that. We weren't even close to being acquaintances. The only time he ever texted me was to relay messages from Sophia's mother, usually something passive-aggressive about our home being too modern or how I wasn't upholding family traditions. But this message wasn't from Mrs. Caldwell. It was from Brandon, straight to me, and it was as cold as a corporate email. "Hey, we're having a small family gathering this Sunday at Mom and Dad's house. It's important. Be there at 3 p.m. It's a surprise, so don't tell Sophia. No, hope you can make it. No, how's it going?" Just a direct demand, like I was being summoned to some royal court. My gut immediately twisted. I stared at the text for a long time, the words replaying in my head like an alarm bell I couldn't shut off. A family gathering I wasn't supposed to tell my wife about? A surprise at a house where I'd never once felt welcomed? Yeah, that was weird. Real weird. I took my phone and walked into the kitchen, where my best friend Jordan was sipping a beer at the counter. We had been watching the game, but now I wasn't in the mood. Brandon just texted me, I said, sliding my phone across the counter. Jordan picked it up, skimmed the message, and raised an eyebrow. That sounds like a trap. I exhaled sharply. Night? Why wouldn't they tell Sophia? Because it's about you, he said simply, taking another sip. You sure you want to walk into whatever this is? I wasn't sure at all. The Caldwells had never liked me, but they tolerated me because Sophia had dug in her heels and made it clear she wasn't going to marry some trust fund stockbroker from their country club. I wasn't like them. I didn't grow up attending fancy banquets or networking with CEOs at charity galas. I came from a blue-collar family, built my career from the ground up, and when I met Sophia, I loved her for her, not for her last name. But to them, I was an outsider, a distraction. I had put up with their condescension for years. The smug glances, the thinly veiled insults, the way they spoke about me in third person, even when I was standing right there. But something about this invitation felt different, like they weren't just going to disapprove of me this time, like they were about to make a move. Jordan set the bottle down with a thud. So, what's the play? I clenched my jaw. I needed to see what this was. I typed back a short response. Sure. See you then. No questions. No hesitation. Just enough to let them believe I was walking straight into whatever they had planned. Guess I'll find out, I muttered, locking my phone. Sunday arrived too fast. The whole morning, Sophia was curled up on the couch, flipping through wedding pictures on her laptop. She had a habit of doing that whenever she was feeling sentimental. You okay? I asked, leaning against the doorway. She glanced up and smiled. Yeah, just looking through old photos. It's crazy, right? We've been married 5 years already. I walked over and kissed the top of her head. She didn't know I was leaving soon, didn't know where I was going. I wasn't about to lie to her, but I also didn't want to worry her. I forced a smile. Yeah, time flies. My stomach twisted. If only she knew what her family was up to. At exactly 2:45 p.m., I got into my car and drove to her parents' house. The Caldwell estate was a monument to wealth. A sprawling 3-story home in Silverwood Heights, the kind of place that screamed old money. Perfectly manicured lawns. A circular driveway lined with imported stone fountains. Grand iron gates that only opened with a security code. I had spent countless weekends here, always feeling like a visitor, a guest in my own marriage. I parked the car, took a breath, and stepped out. As soon as I rang the doorbell, the massive wooden doors swung open, not by a butler, but by Mrs. Caldwell herself. She was dressed like she was attending some exclusive brunch, a pearl necklace around her throat, her expression unreadable. Brandon stood behind her, arms crossed. Lena lingered in the background, pretending to be interested in something on her phone. And Mr. Caldwell? He was already seated in the grand living room, a thick folder on the coffee table in front of him. My pulse kicked up. Something was about to go down. Mrs. Caldwell gave me a thin smile. Come in, dear. I stepped inside, feeling the heavy air settle around me like a weighted blanket. This wasn't a friendly gathering. This wasn't a family meeting. This was an ambush. And I had just walked straight into it. I stepped inside, and the moment the doors closed behind me, I knew I had walked straight into something I wasn't supposed to escape from easily. The air inside the Caldwell estate was always heavy, always filled with the scent of antique wood and whatever expensive candle Mrs. Caldwell had burning to impress guests. But today, the air felt suffocating. The grand chandelier overhead cast its glow on a room filled with nothing but cold, expectant faces. Everyone was already there. Mr. Caldwell sat at the center of the living room like a judge at his podium, his fingers intertwined over the thick folder in front of him. His eyes, sharp and unrelenting, met mine the moment I entered. Mrs. Caldwell, standing next to him, wore that same practiced smile, the kind she always put on before delivering a condescending remark. Brandon was leaning against the fireplace with his arms crossed, smirking like he was enjoying the show already. Lena, Sophia's younger sister, sat on the arm of a chair, her phone in her lap, glancing at me but not making eye contact. And then there were the others, extended family members who rarely showed up unless it was something important. An uncle from out of town. A cousin who never spoke to Sophia, but was suddenly present for whatever this was. A council of vultures, waiting for me to react. I stayed by the doorway, my arms relaxed but my jaw tight. I wasn't going to sit. Sitting meant submitting. Sitting meant I was playing by their rules. Take a seat, Mr. Caldwell said finally, gesturing toward the empty armchair across from him. I didn't move. I'll stand. Something flickered across his face. Annoyance? Frustration? Good. Silence stretched for a long moment, and then Mrs. Caldwell spoke, her voice sugary sweet. We appreciate you coming on such short notice, she said. I tilted my head. Do I have a choice? Her smile didn't waver, but I saw the way her fingers twitched. We assumed you'd want to cooperate. Cooperate with what? I asked, letting my gaze sweep the room. I wasn't told what this was about, just that it was important. That was when Mr. Caldwell leaned forward, fingers tapping against the folder on the coffee table. We need you to sign these, he said. I didn't have to ask what these were. I already knew. I stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and let my eyes fall to the stack of papers he was now pushing toward me. And there it was. The words in bold letters at the top of the page. Divorce agreement. I let out a small, breathy laugh. Are you serious? Mrs. Caldwell sighed like she was exhausted by my inconvenient existence. We've given this a lot of thought, and it's clear that this marriage isn't working. I raised an eyebrow. It isn't working? Or I'm not working for you? Brandon scoffed. Oh, come on, man. Don't make this dramatic. I turned my gaze on him. You mean like ambushing me with a room full of people and shoving divorce papers in my face without Sophia even knowing? That kind of dramatic? That wiped the smirk off his face. I looked back at Mr. Caldwell. Where's Sophia? He didn't answer. I stepped closer, my voice sharp. Where is my wife? Mr. Caldwell exhaled slowly, like a man annoyed that he had to explain himself. She's not here. I nodded once, letting that sink in. So you planned a divorce without telling her. It's for her own good, Mrs. Caldwell said smoothly, as if this were some intervention and not a backroom execution of my marriage. You don't contribute to this family, she continued. You don't respect our traditions. You don't support Sophia's future the way a husband should. This arrangement has been an unfortunate distraction. A distraction. I let the word hang between us, my lips curling into a small, humorless smile. This is cute, I murmured, shaking my head. Cute. Brandon snapped, pushing off the fireplace. What's cute is that you think you belong here. You were a mistake from the start. We're just cleaning it up. I chuckled under my breath. Cleaning it up. Right. Lena shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers tightening around her phone. I caught the small flicker of doubt in her eyes, the first crack in their perfect little united front. I looked back at the papers. So let me get this straight, I said, voice calm. You ambushed me, drafted up divorce papers without my wife's knowledge, and now you expect me to sign them because you said so. It's for the best, Mrs. Caldwell insisted. For who? I countered. Silence. Then, Mr. Caldwell, in his ever-so-patient tone, said, We'd prefer to do this the easy way. I tilted my head. And the hard way? His fingers drummed against the table. Let's not go there. Oh, there it was. The unspoken, or else hanging in the air. They thought they could back me into a corner. That I would break under their pressure, fold like a nobody who had just realized he was being thrown out of a world he was never supposed to enter in the first place. They thought they had power over me. They didn't know I had come prepared. That was when I smirked. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my own folder. A thicker one. Heavier. I tossed it onto the coffee table, right next to their divorce papers. Actually, I said, leaning back, I have a surprise for you too. I watched the way their faces shifted. How Mrs. Caldwell's practiced smile wavered for the first time. How Mr. Caldwell's fingers stilled against the table. How Brandon, ever the smug little snake, narrowed his eyes like he suddenly wasn't sure he was still in control of this conversation. No one reached for the folder at first. It was Mr. Caldwell who finally took it, flipping open the cover with a measured breath. I watched him read the first page, and then the second, and then the color drained from his face. Mrs. Caldwell took it from him next, skimming through the pages so fast her hands started to shake. Brandon grabbed a sheet, scanned it, and his entire expression shattered. What the hell is this? He choked out. I smiled, slow and deliberate. Proof. Silence crashed over the room like a tidal wave. They weren't expecting this. They thought they had all the control, that they were leading this conversation. They weren't. I had just turned their perfect little coup into a full-blown war, and they had no idea what was about to hit them. Mr. Caldwell clenched his jaw so hard I thought his teeth might crack. His voice was quiet, but laced with fury. "You have no idea what you've done." I leaned forward, my smirk deepening. "Oh," I murmured, "I think I do." The silence in the room was deafening. It was the kind of silence that doesn't just fall. It crashes, shatters, and leaves everyone scrambling to pick up the pieces. Mr. Caldwell stared at the documents in front of him, his hands gripping the pages so tightly that I half expected them to rip. Mrs. Caldwell sat frozen beside him, her usual composed demeanor crumbling as her eyes darted over the text. Brandon, always the first to open his mouth, was completely still, his face drained of color. Lena, ever the quiet observer, clutched her phone like it was the only thing grounding her to reality. I crossed my arms and leaned against the back of the armchair they had so graciously offered me earlier. No snide remarks now. I mused, watching them struggle to process what they were looking at. No smug smiles. No veiled insults about how I'm beneath your family. No one answered. Perfect. Mr. Caldwell was the first to snap out of it, his jaw tightening as he slowly set the folder down on the coffee table, like it might explode if he moved too fast. "Where did you get these?" His voice was measured, but I could hear the underlying panic. I tilted my head. "The same way you got my divorce papers drafted without Sophia's knowledge, I imagine. A few well-placed connections, some thorough digging, and the truth just falls into your lap." I smirked. "The difference is, I actually have something worth showing." Mrs. Caldwell's hands trembled as she flipped through another page. "This is," her breath hitched. "This is ridiculous." "Oh," I raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you shaking?" Brandon finally found his voice, though it was weaker than usual. "This is fake," he spat, though the way he refused to look at me said otherwise. "You think you can just waltz in here and accuse our family of this nonsense? You have nothing." I exhaled a soft chuckle and walked over to the coffee table, tapping the folder with my finger. "That right there," I said, my voice smooth. "That's bank records, email chains, proof of your parents' financial manipulation. The distraction you claimed I was? That was just your cover while you drained Sophia's accounts to patch up your little business failures." Brandon's nostrils flared. "That's a damn lie." I shrugged. "Is it?" I reached into my pocket, pulling out a USB drive, and casually tossed it onto the table next to the folder. "If you'd prefer, I can pull up the audio recordings instead. There's nothing quite like hearing someone admit to their crimes in their own voice, don't you think?" Mrs. Caldwell's breath audibly caught in her throat. Brandon lunged for the folder, but Mr. Caldwell snatched it away before he could so much as touch it. His fingers curled around the edges like he was physically holding his family together. "Enough," he growled. I leaned in slightly. "Oh, I don't think we're anywhere near enough." His glare was sharp enough to cut glass, but I wasn't intimidated. Not anymore. Not when I knew exactly how much power I held at this moment. Mrs. Caldwell looked at me, her expression suddenly pleading. "Matthew, let's be reasonable." "Reasonable?" I laughed, shaking my head. "You all lured me here under false pretenses, shoved divorce papers at me like I was some employee you were firing, and now that you realize you don't have the upper hand, you want to be reasonable." I gestured to the USB drive. "You were willing to go behind Sophia's back to get rid of me, but the second I fight back, you want to negotiate." Brandon clenched his fists. "You have no right to do this." I scoffed. "Oh, I have every right. See, you made a crucial mistake. You thought I was just some clueless idiot who would roll over and take it. You thought you had all the leverage." I gestured around the room. "Look at you. Look at all of you. You brought in the whole family for this, planned an entire ambush, convinced yourselves that I'd be too shocked or weak to fight back." I smiled. "You underestimated me." Mr. Caldwell exhaled through his nose, gripping the folder like it was a lifeline. "What do you want?" "Bingo." I pushed off the chair, taking my time as I reached for the pen that was meant for me, the same one they had placed neatly next to the divorce papers, expecting me to sign away my marriage like it was a failed business deal. I picked it up, twirling it between my fingers, letting the anticipation settle over them like a heavy fog. Then I looked at Mrs. Caldwell. "You said this was for Sophia's own good, right?" She swallowed, nodding stiffly. "Then I say we let her decide." Her face fell. Mr. Caldwell's knuckles went white against the folder. That's not an option. I shrugged. It is now. Brandon shook his head furiously. She's too. Too what? I challenged. Too smart. Too strong. Too capable of making her own decisions. I tapped the USB again. Because trust me, if you really believed she was too naive to see the truth, you wouldn't have worked so hard to hide it from her. Lena, who had been uncharacteristically quiet this whole time, suddenly stood up. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the tension like a blade. You have proof. I nodded once. She hesitated, glancing at her parents, then back at me. Everything. My lips curled. Everything. She exhaled slowly, looking down at the table, her hands gripping the sides of her dress. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wasn't innocent in all of this, but she also wasn't as far gone as the rest of them. Brandon scoffed. Oh, don't tell me you're actually buying into this. I don't know. Brandon, she cut in sharply, her voice stronger now. Shouldn't Sophia be the one to decide? The room went dead silent. I watched as Mr. Caldwell clenched his jaw so hard I thought it might shatter. Mrs. Caldwell looked like she was on the verge of a panic attack. And Brandon? He looked like he wanted to punch a hole in the wall. I let the moment stretch, savoring the way their perfect little coup was falling apart in real time. Then I spoke, my voice calm but firm. I suggest you call Sophia, I said, stepping back. Because I'm not signing a damn thing until she hears the truth. And just like that, I turned their ambush into a full-blown war. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. The Caldwells were frozen, staring at me like I had just flipped the entire chessboard. And I had. They thought they were in control, thought they had the power to dictate my life, my marriage, my future. They had spent years looking down on me, dismissing me, treating me like an unwanted guest in their perfect little world. But now, I had flipped the script. Mr. Caldwell's hands were still clenched around the folder of evidence I had dropped like a bomb onto their carefully orchestrated plans. Brandon looked ready to explode, his jaw so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Mrs. Caldwell was pale, her fingers trembling as she gripped the arm of the couch, her eyes darting toward the USB drive sitting on the coffee table like it was a ticking time bomb. Lena, however, looked torn. She wasn't speaking, but she wasn't siding with them either. That hesitation was all I needed to know that she was starting to realize just how deep this deception ran. I had them cornered. And now, I was about to watch them crumble. Right on cue, the front door opened. I turned my head just as Sophia walked in, looking confused. Mom? She called out, stepping into the room. Dad? What's going on? The air in the room shifted instantly. I saw Mrs. Caldwell visibly straighten, her expression smoothing into something almost neutral, like she hadn't just spent the last 15 minutes trying to tear my marriage apart. Mr. Caldwell glanced at me, then at his daughter, his mind clearly working overtime to regain control of the situation. Brandon stepped back from the fireplace, his smirk gone, replaced with something more cautious. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched. This was their moment to come clean, to prove to Sophia just how little respect they had for her choices, for her independence, for her ability to think for herself. Would they admit to what they had done? Or would they try to bury it, right in front of her? Sophia's eyes landed on the papers on the coffee table, and she frowned. What's all this? Her mother spoke first. Sweetheart, she said, her voice sickeningly sweet. Why don't you come sit down? We were just having a discussion with your husband. Sophia didn't move. About what? I finally decided to break my silence. About the fact that they ambushed me with divorce papers. I said, my voice calm but firm. Without telling you. Sophia's entire body stiffened. What? Her voice was barely above a whisper. They had everything planned. I continued, gesturing toward the folder her father still clung to like a lifeline. They brought in the whole family, made sure I was alone, and then handed me this. I reached down, grabbing the stack of divorce papers they had shoved at me when I walked in. I held them up for her to see. Because apparently, I'm not fit for this family. Sophia's eyes darted to her parents, her expression shifting from confusion to something else. Something dangerous. Mom. Her voice was sharper now. Her mother sighed, feigning exhaustion, like I was being unreasonable. Like I was causing a scene instead of simply exposing what they had done. Sophia, sweetheart, listen, Mrs. Caldwell started. We just wanted to. You did this. Sophia interrupted, her voice cold. Her mother hesitated. Brandon took that as his cue to step in. "Come on, Sophia. You know this was coming," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "You had to see it. He doesn't belong here. He never did." I watched as Sophia's entire posture changed. She turned to her father. "Did you know about this?" Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat, setting the folder down. "Sophia, we were just trying to do what's best for you. You have to understand." "No," she cut him off. "I don't have to understand anything. I have to ask you a question, and I want you to answer it honestly." She gestured toward the divorce papers in my hands. "Did you try to get my husband to sign these behind my back?" A beat of silence. Then, Mrs. Caldwell tried to smile, her voice soft and manipulative. "We were only trying to protect you, dear." Sophia's face went blank. "That," she said, her voice like steel, "was not my question." Mr. Caldwell exhaled through his nose. "Sophia, did you do this behind my back?" Silence. And that was all the answer she needed. Sophia nodded slowly, then turned to me. "What did you do?" she asked. I met her gaze, unshaken. I did what they didn't expect me to do. I walked over to the folder I had brought and opened it. I pulled out a set of documents, flipping through them until I reached the part one wanted. Then I handed them to her. Sophia took the papers, scanning the first few lines, and her face drained of color. She flipped to another page, then another, and then slowly looked up at her father. "You took money from me?" Her father stiffened. "I can explain." "No," she snapped. "No, you can't. You stole from me." I spoke before they could try to twist the narrative. "They've been using your name to fund their bad business deals, Sophia," I said. "They've been pulling from our joint accounts for years. Whenever they needed money, they used you as their safety net." Sophia's hands shook as she held the documents. This can't be right. Check the records yourself." I pointed to the USB drive still sitting on the coffee table. "It's all there. Every transaction. Every shady wire transfer. Every lie they've told you." Mrs. Caldwell paled. "Sophia, you have to understand. We only did this because we love you." Sophia let out a bitter laugh. "Love me?" she echoed. "You tried to destroy my marriage without even telling me. You stole from me. You used me. And you want to call that love?" Brandon, still grasping for control, scoffed. "Oh, come on, Sophia, don't be dramatic." "Shut up, Brandon." He blinked. "Excuse me." Sophia turned to face him, her body radiating pure fury. "You knew about this, didn't you?" Brandon hesitated. That was enough. She shook her head, stepping back like she needed to physically distance herself from her own family. "I cannot believe this." She turned to me, her voice quieter now. "How long have you known?" I exhaled. "A couple of months." She stared at me, taking that in. "And you didn't tell me?" "I wanted to," I admitted. "But I needed proof first." She swallowed hard, nodding. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, the realization sinking in. Her parents weren't who she thought they were. Her brother wasn't who she thought he was. Her entire family had just proven that they saw her not as a daughter, not as a sister, but as a means to an end. She turned back to the divorce papers on the table. Then, she reached for the pen. Her mother gasped. "Sophia." Sophia signed my documents. And just like that, the Caldwell empire began to fall. The moment Sophia signed those papers, I swear I could hear the foundation of the Caldwell family's power cracking beneath them. Mr. Caldwell's face went stone white, his fingers gripping the edge of the table like he needed something solid to hold on to. Mrs. Caldwell let out a soft gasp, barely above a whisper, but it was Brandon who snapped first. "You can't be serious," he spat, stepping forward like he could physically undo what had just happened. "Sophia, you don't actually believe any of this, do you?" Sophia turned to him slowly. Her eyes, usually filled with warmth, usually the same ones that had looked at me on our wedding day with nothing but love, were ice cold. "You think I don't believe the bank records?" she asked, her voice controlled, deadly. "You think I don't recognize my own name on transactions I never approved?" Brandon opened his mouth, then closed it. He knew there was nothing he could say to explain the evidence sitting right in front of them. "I can't believe you did this," Sophia continued, shaking her head. "You, all of you, you used me." Mrs. Caldwell straightened her back, regaining just enough of her composure to try and twist the narrative. "Sweetheart, we were never using you. We were protecting you." Sophia let out a sharp laugh, one that had zero humor in it. "Protecting me?" she echoed. "By lying to me? By stealing from me?" By trying to erase my marriage without even telling me. Her mother flinched. I watched as Mr. Caldwell exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening so much I thought it might snap. His face had that calculated stillness of a man trying to find a way out of a losing game. That's when he made a mistake. Instead of apologizing, instead of taking any accountability, he looked directly at me. "You planned this, didn't you?" he said, his voice low and accusing. "You played the victim, but the whole time, you were setting this up." I didn't even blink. I wasn't the one draining my daughter's accounts behind her back. His nostrils flared. "You're a snake." I leaned forward slightly. "And you're a fraud." The room tensed, the unspoken war between us now fully out in the open. Mr. Caldwell wasn't used to losing. He wasn't used to being exposed. For years, he had been untouchable, hiding his financial disasters behind his prestigious name and the illusion of control. But the moment I threw their secrets onto the table, that illusion shattered. And he hated it. Sophia broke the tension first, turning to her father with a look that made it painfully clear she was seeing him for the first time. Really seeing him. "I trusted you," she said, her voice raw. "You made me believe I could count on my family, that you had my best interests at heart." Her father opened his mouth, but she cut him off. "You knew," she continued, her voice rising. "You knew exactly what you were doing, and you thought I was too blind to see it. You thought I'd never find out." Lena, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke up. "I didn't know," she whispered. The words were small, but they carried weight. Mrs. Caldwell turned to her sharply. "Lena." "I didn't," Lena insisted, looking between them all. "I thought you were just, I don't know, moving money around. I didn't know you were stealing." Mr. Caldwell clenched his jaw. "It wasn't stealing." Lena scoffed, her voice unsteady. "Then what would you call it?" Silence. I took in the fractured state of their family, watching as the cracks in their armor spread faster than they could cover them. Then, Brandon snapped. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, shaking his head. "You're really going to throw away everything for him?" His eyes locked onto Sophia with pure resentment, like this was somehow all my fault instead of their own. Sophia didn't even hesitate. "I'm throwing away nothing," she said, voice steady. "I'm taking back everything you try to take from me." Brandon let out a harsh laugh, turning back toward their father like he was expecting backup, but Mr. Caldwell wasn't looking at him. He was staring at the divorce papers on the table. His hands twitched. His breathing was controlled, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers curled against his palm. He was realizing it now. He had lost. For years, he had treated Sophia like a pawn, controlling every major decision in her life under the guise of family duty. He thought she would always fall in line, always defer to their authority. But now, she had made a choice. And it wasn't them. "Dad," Brandon said, stepping forward slightly. "Say something." Mr. Caldwell didn't answer. I could feel the anger building inside him, but not the kind that explodes. Not yet. No, he was calculating. He was waiting, trying to find a way to regain control. So I made sure he knew there was no way out. "You know what happens next, don't you?" I asked, watching him carefully. His eyes flickered toward me, cautious. I gestured toward the USB drive still sitting on the table. "Everything in that folder? It's already backed up. And a copy?" "That's already in my lawyer's hands." Brandon's head snapped toward me. "You wouldn't." I just smiled. "I would." The silence that followed was thick, choking, like the last dying breath of a kingdom before it crumbles. I let the weight of it settle over them. Let them feel, for the first time, what true powerlessness felt like. Then I straightened, picking up the divorce papers from the table, flipping through the signed pages. "Thank you, Sophia," I said, slipping them into my folder. "Now we're done here." I turned toward the door, but Sophia's voice stopped me. "Not yet." I turned back. She was staring at her father, her gaze unwavering. "I want you to look at me," she said quietly. Mr. Caldwell finally lifted his head. "You built your life around control," Sophia said. "You told yourself that if you dictated everything, you'd never lose. But guess what?" She gestured to the empty space between them, to the family she no longer belonged to. "You just lost everything." Mr. Caldwell's hands curled into fists. Mrs. Caldwell was crying silently. Brandon stood rigid, his jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. "Lena?" Lena just looked sad. Sophia let out a slow, controlled breath, then reached for the USB drive. "I'll let the authorities handle the rest," she said simply. Then she turned to me. Let's go. And just like that, we walked out the door, leaving behind the wreckage of the Caldwell dynasty. As we stepped outside the Caldwell estate, I could still feel the weight of everything I had left behind in that suffocating room. The silence, the shattered illusions, the look on Mr. Caldwell's face when he realized he had lost everything. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Sophia walked beside me, her posture stiff, her hands balled into fists at her sides. I could tell she was holding herself together by sheer willpower alone. She hadn't said a word since she told her family she was leaving. I opened the car door for her, but she hesitated before getting in. Her hands trembled slightly, her breathing uneven. I reached out, gently placing a hand on her arm. Sophia. She turned her head to look at me, and for the first time since she had read the evidence, I saw it, the anger simmering beneath the surface, rage held back by sheer control. I need a minute, she whispered. I nodded, stepping back as she ran a hand through her hair, exhaling sharply. Then, suddenly, she let out a dry, bitter laugh. My own family, she muttered, shaking her head. They thought they could just push you out of my life. Like I was some child they could manipulate. I leaned against the car, letting her get it out. Did they ever even love me? She asked suddenly, her voice raw. Or was I just their investment? I didn't answer right away, because honestly, I didn't know, and I wasn't going to lie to her, not now. I think they convinced themselves that controlling you was love, I said finally. But real love? No, real love isn't conditional. It isn't about power. It isn't about keeping you in a golden cage. She nodded slowly, pressing her fingers against her temples. Then, the front door of the estate slammed open behind us. We both turned just in time to see Brandon storming down the steps, his face twisted in fury. Sophia, he barked. You can't just walk away from us. I stepped in front of her instinctively, but she was already moving past me, her own anger boiling over. You still don't get it, do you? She snapped, turning to face her brother. I'm not walking away. I'm leaving, and I'm never coming back. Brandon scoffed. You think you can just cut off your family? What are you going to do, Sophia? Be a nobody with him? He jerked his chin toward me, his words dripping with contempt. I felt my fists clench, but Sophia spoke before I could. You don't get to talk about him like that, she said, her voice sharp as a blade. You don't get to act like you're better than him, not when you've spent your whole life hiding behind Dad's money, scamming your way out of responsibility. Brandon's face turned red. You're making a mistake. Sophia's eyes burned with fury. No, I made a mistake trusting you. She turned on her heel, heading straight for the car. I followed, watching over my shoulder as Brandon stood there, fists clenched, powerless for the first time in his life. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away from the estate without looking back. Sophia didn't say anything for a long time. She just stared out the window, breathing hard. Then, finally, she whispered, "What do we do now?" I reached over, taking her hand in mine. "We rebuild," I said simply. Without them. And just like that, the Caldwell dynasty was dead. Leaving the Caldwell estate was supposed to feel like freedom, like breaking free from chains that had been tightening around both of us for years. But as I drove away, gripping the wheel with one hand and holding Sophia's trembling fingers with the other, I realized something. This wasn't over. Not yet. Because people like the Caldwells don't accept defeat. They don't just let go of control. They claw for it, scheme for it. And if they can't win, they make damn sure everyone else loses too. I glanced at Sophia. She was staring out the window, her expression unreadable. The anger from earlier had settled into something else, something calculated. "Sophia," I said, my voice careful. She didn't turn her head, just kept watching the trees blur past. "Yeah. Are you okay?" She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Okay," she echoed. "I don't even know what that means anymore." I squeezed her hand. "We'll figure this out." Finally, she turned to me, her eyes dark with determination. "They won't stop," she whispered. "You know that, right?" I nodded. "I know. They'll try to turn this around. Spin some story about how I was manipulated, how you tricked me. They'll lie." I finished for her. Sophia exhaled through her nose, her grip on my hand tightening. "Then we can't just walk away." I glanced at her, a slow smile creeping onto my face. "What are you saying?" She turned back toward the window, but I saw the way her jaw hardened. "I'm saying," she murmured, "that if they want to play dirty, they're about to learn that I can too." Phase 1, financial ruin. The first thing we did was leak everything. Not to the police. Not yet. That would come later. No, we went public first. It started with whispers, subtle rumors spreading through the exclusive Silverwood Heights social circles, where reputation was everything. The Caldwells had built their legacy on the illusion of wealth and power, and the best way to tear them down was to rip that illusion apart. Sophia knew exactly who to talk to, which socialites would be desperate for a scandal, which ones hated her family, but had always been too afraid to speak up. Within a week, stories started circulating about shady business deals, embezzlement, and backdoor financial losses. At first, people dismissed them as gossip. But then, someone got their hands on the real documents. Documents that just happened to find their way into a journalist's inbox. From there, it exploded. The story went viral in their social circles. The once untouchable Caldwells suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. Investors pulling out, clients backing away, business partners distancing themselves. Then came the banks, with their financial empire unraveling. It didn't take long before creditors came knocking. Their assets were reevaluated, and suddenly, all those loans they had taken out, they couldn't keep up. The house in Silverwood Heights, the one they had used as collateral, seized. The luxury cars, repossessed. The once flourishing Caldwell enterprises, collapsing under lawsuits. Sophia read every headline that came out, every scathing article detailing her father's business failures, every news alert announcing that Brandon had been removed from a board position. And every time, she just smiled. Phase 2, Brandon's fall. The thing about Brandon was that he had always been the golden child. The one groomed to take over the family name. The one given everything, protected from consequences. Until now. With his father's company sinking, Brandon found himself exposed. See, while Mr. Caldwell had been embezzling, Brandon had been doing worse. Using company funds for personal expenses. Setting up shell accounts to funnel money into private investments. And unlike his father, who at least knew how to cover his tracks, Brandon was sloppy. It didn't take long for forensic accountants to trace where the money had gone. And when they did, Brandon was hit with criminal charges. Sophia and I were at home when we got the news. I was making coffee when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, read the headline, and then let out a slow exhale. Well, she murmured, setting the phone down. Brandon's been arrested. I raised an eyebrow. For what? She picked up the phone again, scrolling. Fraud. Money laundering. Wire fraud. I chuckled. Busy guy. Sophia smirked, taking a sip of her coffee. Not anymore. And just like that, the golden child was gone. Phase 3, the final nail in the coffin. Mr. Caldwell was next. The moment Brandon was arrested, authorities turned their eyes to him. The forensic audit on his company uncovered years of financial fraud, shady dealings, and unpaid debts. Lawsuits piled up, and one by one, his former allies, business partners, investors, even friends, turned their backs on him. Nobody wanted to be associated with a sinking ship. And soon, Mr. Caldwell was facing a fate even worse than prison. Irrelevance. See, men like him don't fear losing money. They know how to rebuild. What they fear, what truly terrifies them, is losing status, losing control. Mr. Caldwell went from powerful businessman to outcast in less than 6 months. Nobody returned his calls. Nobody invited him to exclusive events. Nobody wanted anything to do with a disgraced man with no money, no business, and no influence. And that was worse than any prison sentence. Sophia and I finalized our divorce shortly after. Not because we didn't love each other, but because we wanted nothing tying us legally to her family. We sat in the lawyer's office, signing the final documents, and when it was over, Sophia smiled. A fresh start, she said. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. We did it. And we had. We weren't running anymore. We weren't trapped under the Caldwell name, under their control. We were free. A few months later, Sophia and I were sitting at a quiet cafe, watching the world move on. Sophia scrolled through her phone, her lips twitching upward. Mom's living in a 2-bedroom rental now, she murmured. I chuckled. I bet she still acts like she owns the country club. She does, Sophia said dryly, shaking her head. But nobody invites her anymore. I smirked. And your dad? She turned her phone toward me. It was a picture of Mr. Caldwell, standing outside a law firm, looking older, defeated. He tried to apply for a job, she said. Didn't get it. I let out a low whistle. Damn, Sophia set her phone down, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she exhaled and leaned back in her chair. They did this to themselves, she said simply. And she was right. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they could dictate her life, erase me, control everything. But in the end, they lost everything. And we walked away, free, victorious, and untouchable. It had been months since we walked out of the Caldwell estate, leaving behind the wreckage of their perfect little world. Months since we exposed the truth, shattered their influence, and let them drown in their own corruption. But the beauty of revenge isn't in the moment it happens. It's in the aftermath. The slow, excruciating fallout as everything they once controlled crumbles around them. The Caldwell downfall. The Caldwells had always been careful, meticulous in the way they crafted their image. The respected businessman, the doting mother, the successful heir, the golden family. But when you take away the money, the reputation, the power, all you're left with is the truth. And the truth was, they were nothing without their illusion of control. Brandon's arrest had been the first domino to fall, exposing his fraudulent accounts, his embezzlement schemes, and his reckless financial decisions that had been propped up by his father's name. With the family business already under fire, Mr. Caldwell could do nothing but watch as his legacy crumbled. Bankruptcy filings, lawsuits, creditors seizing assets, their lavish estate, gone, their country club memberships, revoked, their private accounts, once filled with generational wealth, frozen under investigation. Mr. Caldwell's business partners, the same ones who used to praise him at every gala, shake his hand at every fundraiser, call him a visionary, suddenly didn't know him anymore. He was toxic now, a failure, a disgrace. And people like him, they don't survive disgrace. Mrs. Caldwell, she had been the face of high society, the woman who dictated which families mattered and which ones didn't. But now, she was nothing but a scandal. Once the queen of Silverwood Heights, she had been blacklisted from the very social circles she used to command. Invitations stopped coming. People stopped returning her calls. The same women she used to sip champagne with at luncheons were now whispering behind her back, relishing in her downfall the way she once relished in the suffering of others. And Brandon? He was in prison, facing years behind bars for financial fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement. The golden son, the heir, the one who was supposed to carry on the family name, now he was just another criminal in an orange jumpsuit. And when it came time for his sentencing, Sophia and I sat in the back of the courtroom, watching as he was led away in handcuffs. He turned once, locking eyes with Sophia. His stare was filled with hate, with resentment, with the fury of a man who had spent his entire life believing he was untouchable, only to realize that the world didn't work that way. Sophia? She didn't flinch. She just smiled. The divorce and the new beginning. After everything, the last step was our divorce. Not because we didn't love each other, but because we needed a clean break. I remember the day we signed the final papers, sitting in the lawyer's office. Sophia glanced at me, her fingers running over the crisp pages of her freedom. "This doesn't feel like an ending," she murmured. I smiled. "It's not." And it wasn't. This wasn't the end of us. It was just the end of them. The end of their influence, their control, their ability to manipulate and destroy. Sophia had spent her entire life under the Caldwell name, a name that had once meant power and status, but now meant fraud and disgrace. By signing that paper, she wasn't losing anything. She was choosing herself. We walked out of that office lighter, unburdened. For the first time in years, we were free. The final act of revenge. You'd think that would be the end of it. That we'd walk away, let them rot in the ruins of their own making. But there was one last piece to play. Because while their money was gone, their reputation shattered, and their golden son locked behind bars, they still had one thing left to lose. Their dignity. So we made sure they lost that, too. Sophia's last move was simple but brilliant. She told her story. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't seek out TV interviews or some grand spectacle. She simply sat down, wrote a detailed letter, and sent it to every major publication in the city. It was raw, honest, damning. She told the world about her parents' betrayal, the way they tried to control her, steal from her, manipulate her into believing she was nothing more than an asset to be used. She wrote about Brandon's fraud, about the night they ambushed me with divorce papers, about how they tried to erase me like I had been nothing but a temporary inconvenience. She told the truth, and the world listened. The article went viral, spreading like wildfire. People who had once admired the Caldwells, who had envied their wealth and prestige, suddenly saw them for what they truly were: liars, manipulators, criminals. And that was the final nail in the coffin. Because now, it wasn't just their money that was gone. It wasn't just their business, their social standing, their family name. It was their legacy. The Caldwell name? It wasn't one of power anymore. It was one of ruin. And when the dust settled, when all was said and done, and we were finally standing in the ashes of their empire, Sophia turned to me one night, sitting on our new apartment balcony, and let out a slow breath. "We did it," she whispered. I reached for her hand, lacing my fingers through hers. We did. And as we sat there, the cool night breeze running over our skin, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I realized something. This wasn't just revenge. This wasn't just about getting back at them, making them pay, ensuring they felt the weight of every wrong they had done. This was about freedom. Because for the first time in forever, Sophia wasn't looking over her shoulder. She wasn't trapped in a life dictated by someone else's rules. She was free. And me? I was right there with her. Untouchable. Victorious. And finally free.